They gave me the worst spot at the family campground. They had no idea I owned the land. "Can you set up over there, Mrs. Eleanor?" Roger, my daughter-in-law's nephew, spoke with that condescending tone I've learned to recognize after turning 75 years old. That tone young people use when they think older folks are a nuisance, but they try to cover it up. "Over there?" I asked, looking where his finger pointed. The last corner of the clearing, right next to the portable toilets, in an area that was clearly uneven and full of small rocks. "Yes, it's the only available space left." Roger didn't even look me in the eye as he said it. Too busy with his checklist. Most everyone else reserved their spots weeks ago. He didn't mention, of course, that they never sent me the information to reserve my space, that I found out about the annual family camping trip almost by accident when my son, Matthew, mentioned it during our brief weekly phone call. A call that, as always, lasted less than 5 minutes. "I understand," I replied with a smile he didn't see. "I'll manage." And that was how my weekend began. I hauled my tent and gear all by myself toward the worst spot in the campground, while I watched Veronica, my daughter-in-law, directing everyone as if she were a military general. With her hair pulled back in a perfectly neat ponytail, her camping clothes looked like they were straight out of a catalog, and that firm voice she used to organize everyone but me. Not that I was surprised. After 25 years of being Veronica's mother-in-law, I already knew my place in the family hierarchy. Sometime during the early years of her marriage to my son, she decided I was expendable. A retired teacher with nothing interesting to contribute. The old lady who's only good for watching the grandkids when it's convenient. If they only knew that my feet were standing on land that belonged to me. That every tree, every boulder, every stone in this beautiful forest was legally mine. A secret I've kept for 5 years, ever since my Robert left this world, leaving me not only his love and memories, but also this 370-acre natural paradise. "Don't tell them yet, Eleanor," he had asked me in his final days. "Wait for the right moment, when it truly matters." And I, as always, respected his wishes. Robert always had reasons for his decisions, even if he didn't always share them with me immediately. The trust he created before he passed away kept my name hidden as the owner, a legal maneuver to protect the estate and avoid tax complications, according to our lawyer. I set up my little tent with the skill that comes with years. Robert and I had camped many times in our youth. He would be proud to see that I still remembered every step, every knot, every detail to make sure my temporary shelter was secure, even if it was in the worst possible spot. "Need any help, ma'am?" I looked up to find Jake, my 16-year-old grandson, tall like his grandfather, with that same curious look that reminded me so much of Robert. "I'm fine, sweetheart, thank you," I replied, giving the tent the final adjustment. "How about you? You look taller since last time." "I think I grew a couple of inches," he said, shrugging with that teenage awkwardness. I mentally translated. Veronica suddenly remembered she had a mother-in-law and sent her son to fulfill the minimum courtesy. "I'm perfectly fine. Tell your mother thank you for the consideration." Jake nodded and turned to leave, but then stopped as if remembering something. "Grandma, is it true you've known this place from before?" The question took me by surprise. "Why do you ask?" "I don't know. Dad mentioned something about this land belonging to a friend of Grandpa's and that you had been here before." I smiled. At least Matthew partially remembered our conversation when I discreetly suggested he use the land of a friend of Dad's for their family camping trip. "Yes, I know this place pretty well. Your grandfather and I spent many happy times here." "Cool," he replied with that moderate enthusiasm so typical of teenagers. "Maybe you can tell me about it later." I watched him walk away toward where the rest of the family and friends were setting up their tents in the best spots in the clearing. Flat, shaded areas, near the stream, far from the chemical toilets they had installed. I observed the camp while organizing my things. There were about 15 tents spread out in the main clearing. I recognized several of Veronica's relatives, some of my son's friends from work, and of course, my small family. Matthew, busy with his phone even here, in the middle of the woods. Veronica, directing everything. Lucy, my 14-year-old granddaughter, glued to her group of friends, and Jake, now helping to set up a giant grill. I took out my folding chair and sat down to contemplate the forest. My forest. Robert had bought it almost secretly 3 years before he got sick. An investment for our future, he had told me. A place where our family could always reconnect with nature. The irony was not lost on me. Here was the family, completely disconnected from me, the guardian of this natural treasure. "Attention, everyone!" Roger's amplified voice interrupted my thoughts. He was holding a megaphone unnecessarily powerful for the size of the group. "Welcome to day 1 of our annual campout." He proceeded to list a meticulously timed itinerary. Group hike, competitions, communal lunch, organized games, night bonfire. Everything sounded so structured, it seemed more like a military training camp than a family gathering in nature. And remember, this year we have the privilege of being on this beautiful land thanks to Veronica's efforts, so let's give her a round of applause. Everyone clapped while my daughter-in-law smiled complacently, as if she had created every tree and every stream with her own hands. I couldn't help a little smile, if only they knew. The morning went by without anyone including me in the activities. I watched as they formed groups for the hike, how they handed out the walkie-talkies, how they assigned responsibilities. No one seemed to notice that old Eleanor was still sitting next to her tent, watching. I decided to take my own walk. I knew paths they would never find on their organized hike. I took my walking stick, more of a precaution than a necessity, my water bottle, and my small backpack with provisions. As I walked away from the camp, I noticed something that made me frown. Several of the young people were cutting branches from young trees to use as stakes or to build temporary structures. A group of children was throwing rocks into the stream, disturbing the fish. Some people had left snack wrappers on the ground. This forest had been a refuge for so many species. Robert and I had documented more than 30 types of birds, foxes, rabbits, and even a puma that occasionally visited the farther areas. Seeing them treat the place with such carelessness hurt me deeply. I walked for almost an hour on paths only Robert and I knew. I reached a small, hidden clearing where wild orchids bloomed, a rarity in this region. I sat on a flat rock that we had used many times as our natural bench, and I closed my eyes, feeling Robert's presence. "Is this the right moment, my love?" I asked the wind. I didn't expect an answer, of course, but sometimes I felt he was guiding me somehow. I returned to the camp when the sun was at its highest point. They had set up folding tables for the communal lunch, and the aroma of grilled meat permeated the air. I walked closer, trying to blend in. "Grandma!" Lucy's voice startled me. My granddaughter approached, her long dark hair pulled into a messy braid. "Where were you? Dad was asking for you." "I went for a walk," I replied with a smile. "I know some special spots here." "Seriously?" We went on the official hike, and it was pretty boring. Roger only showed us the main path and made us take pictures next to a big tree. "This forest holds many wonderful secrets," I told her. "There are places here that look like they're straight out of a storybook." Her eyes lit up for a moment, but then one of her friends called her, and she left with a quick, "Talk to you later, Grandma." I served myself a plate of salad and meat and looked for a place to sit. All the tables were occupied with animated groups. No one invited me to join. I was about to go back to my chair next to my tent when Matthew finally noticed my presence. "Mom, come over here," he called, pointing to a small space next to him. "We saved you a spot." "We saved" was generous. The space barely existed, and I had to squeeze in between my son and a friend of his I barely knew. Veronica, sitting across from us, barely acknowledged me with a nod before continuing her conversation about the problems of finding good staff for her event company. "Are you comfortable with your location, Mom?" Matthew asked while checking something on his phone. "I feel bad you got stuck next to the bathrooms." "I'm fine, son," I replied. "I've camped in much worse places in my time." "Mrs. Eleanor could tell us stories about when camping was truly rustic, right?" Veronica commented, with that tone that pretended to be kind but hid condescension. "Before all these modern conveniences." "Indeed," I replied, maintaining my smile. "Your father-in-law and I were quite the adventurers. Once we camped for a whole month in the Rockies, completely isolated." "A month?" Jake, who was passing nearby, stopped, interested. "No internet or anything?" "No electricity, no running water, no company other than nature and ourselves," I confirmed. "They were some of the best weeks of my life. I couldn't live without my phone for a single day," commented Lucy, who had also approached, looking at her grandmother with a mixture of disbelief and new curiosity. You learn many things when you only have the forest as your teacher, I said. For example, knowing how to read the clouds can save your life. Read the clouds? Jake asked. Yes, the clouds tell you stories about the coming weather, like those ones over there. I pointed toward the horizon where some dark clouds were beginning to form. Those tell us we'll have rain before dark, probably a heavy storm. Veronica let out a little laugh. The forecast says it'll be clear all weekend, Eleanor. We checked the weather exhaustively before planning this. Forecasts are often wrong in mountainous areas like this, I commented without insisting. There was no point in arguing. Well, since our family meteorologist has spoken, Veronica joked, provoking laughter at the table. Let's move on with the plan. Roger will announce the competitions in 15 minutes. The afternoon went by with several organized Olympics led by Roger. Races, a scavenger hunt, shelter building. No one invited me to participate, assuming perhaps that a 75-year-old woman wouldn't be interested or capable. I remained a spectator, applauding my grandchildren's achievements when I had the chance. During the shelter building competition, I noted with concern that several groups were cutting down young trees to build their structures. I couldn't contain myself and approached one of the groups. "Excuse me," I said with all the kindness I could manage. "Those trees you're cutting are young redwoods. They're a protected species and take decades to grow." A man I recognized as a friend of Veronica's looked at me impatiently. "They're just sticks here, ma'am. There are thousands of trees here." "Every tree is important for the forest's balance," I insisted. "Besides, there are plenty of fallen branches you can use without harming living trees." "Look," another man intervened, "we appreciate your concern, but we're in the middle of a timed competition. We can't stop to look for fallen branches now." I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Veronica. "Eleanor, why don't you go rest a bit? You must be tired." Her tone was kind but firm, making it clear I was interfering. "The boys know what they're doing." "But, Veronica, they're damaging." "It's just for fun, Eleanor. It's not like we're going to destroy the whole forest." She gave me a condescending pat. "Besides, we have permission from the owner to use the land however we want." The irony of her comment almost made me laugh or cry. I wasn't sure. I walked away without insisting further. It wasn't the time or the place to reveal my secret, but every small tree cut felt like a personal wound. The afternoon began to darken earlier than normal. The clouds I had pointed out now covered a large part of the sky, darker and more threatening. The wind started to blow hard, shaking the tarps and awnings they had set up. "Looks like we're getting some wind," Roger commented through his megaphone. "Secure your tents well and get ready for the bonfire tonight." I approached Matthew, who was securing his awning. "Son, it's not just wind. A strong storm is coming. You should consider relocating some tents." My son looked at me with affection, but with clear dismissal. "Mom, modern tents can withstand any weather. Don't worry." "It's not about the tents themselves," I explained patiently. "It's about the location. The ones near the stream are in an area that floods easily when it rains hard, and the ones under those large trees aren't safe during electrical storms." "How do you know all that?" he asked, genuinely curious for a moment. I was about to tell him the truth, but I held back. "Your father and I knew this area well. We came here many times." Matthew smiled with nostalgia. Dad and his adventures. Then he came back to reality. "But don't worry, Mom. The forecast says it'll be fine, and Veronica planned everything very carefully." "At least consider moving the tents of the younger kids," I insisted. "I'll check with Veronica," he promised, though I knew he'd probably forget as soon as he walked away. I returned to my tent and started preparing it for the storm. I dug a small drainage trench around it, secured the stakes better, waterproofed the exposed seams with a spray I always carried, and placed all my belongings in waterproof bags inside the tent. While I was working, I noticed Jake watching me from a distance. He finally approached. "Do you really think it's going to rain, Grandma?" "I don't think so, I'm sure," I replied without stopping my work. "And it will be a heavy rain." Jake looked at the sky with uncertainty. "Mom says they're just passing clouds." "Your mother is a very intelligent woman," I said diplomatically, "but there are things that you only learn with years and experience." My grandson hesitated for a moment. "Would you help me check my tent?" just in case?" I smiled, feeling a small victory. "Of course." We spent 20 minutes securing his tent, which he shared with 2 friends. I taught them how to make a proper drain and where to place the stakes for better wind resistance. "Where did you learn all this, Grandma?" he asked as we finished. "Life teaches you many things, my boy. When I was young, your grandfather and I spent months camping and exploring. He taught me a lot, and the rest I learned out of necessity." "You never told me those stories," Jake said, and I detected a slight reproach in his voice. "You never asked," I replied gently, "but I'm always here to tell you everything you want to know." The first thunder rumbled in the distance just as we finished. Jake looked at the sky with awe. "You better tell your friends to put all their important things in waterproof bags," I advised him, "and if you want to feel safer, you can come to my tent if things get bad." "Thanks, Grandma," he said, and surprised me with a quick hug before running to alert his friends. The camp stirred with the sound of thunder. I saw Veronica and Roger in the center of the clearing, looking at the sky with concern, frantically checking their phones. The first drops began to fall, thick and cold. In a matter of minutes, the drizzle turned into a downpour. People ran everywhere trying to save food, electronic equipment, and clothing. I took refuge in my tent, dry and safe thanks to my precautions. From there, through the small plastic window, I watched the chaos I had foreseen unfold. The tents near the stream already had water coming in underneath. The ones in areas without natural drainage were in the middle of increasingly large puddles. The wind lashed at the poorly secured tarps, and some awnings flew away. I saw Matthew and Veronica running in the rain, trying to coordinate everyone. Roger shouted instructions through his megaphone, though he could barely be heard over the storm's roar. Then the inevitable happened. Lightning illuminated the sky, immediately followed by a deafening thunderclap. One of the large trees I had mentioned, weakened by years of root erosion, creaked ominously. It didn't fall, but it was enough to cause panic. "Move away from the large tree areas," someone shouted. Exactly what I had warned about hours before. When the situation became clearly dangerous, I left my tent with my raincoat on and started to help. I directed families with children toward the highest and safest areas. I showed some how to quickly reinforce their tents and offered my dry shelter to a mother with a baby. As the storm raged, I saw my grandchildren, soaked and scared, looking for somewhere to take shelter. Their tent was in an area that was starting to flood, despite our efforts. "Jake, Lucy," I called them, "come to my tent." They ran toward me, grateful for the shelter. Soon my small tent housed my 2 grandchildren, the mother with the baby, and a friend of Lucy's. We were cramped but dry, while outside the storm transformed the idyllic camp into a battlefield against the elements. "You were right, Grandma," Lucy said, trembling slightly as I handed her a dry towel. "How did you know this storm was coming?" I looked through the tent window at my rain-lashed forest, a forest I knew as well as the lines on my own hand. "There are things you simply know when you've lived long enough," I replied. "And when you love a place, you learn to read its signs." The storm continued to roar outside, but inside my small tent, in the worst spot of the camp that turned out to be the safest, I felt something beginning to change. My grandchildren were looking at me with new eyes, and I knew that the moment Robert had mentioned was getting closer. The storm continued for hours. My small tent, set up in that despised corner next to the bathrooms, unexpectedly became one of the few dry shelters in the camp. What started as a space for 5 people soon housed 8, when 3 other soaked young men asked for asylum from the torrential rain. "How is it possible that this is the only tent that isn't flooding?" asked one of the newcomers, a friend of Jake's, who introduced himself as Joe. "My grandma knows what she's doing," Jake replied, with a pride I hadn't heard from him before. "She taught me and my friends how to prep our tents, but the storm was stronger than we thought." "Nobody listens to us old folks," I commented with a smile, handing a dry towel to Joe. "But nature doesn't discriminate by age. It only respects those who respect it." The mother with the baby, who had introduced herself as Christina, gently rocked her little one as he slept, oblivious to the chaos outside. "Thank you for taking us in, Mrs. Eleanor. I don't know what I would have done if our tent kept flooding." "There's nothing to thank me for," I replied. "In times like these, we're all family." Outside, Lightning intermittently lit up the camp, which had turned into a muddy mess. Through the plastic window, I could see figures running in the rain, trying to save what they could. I could make out Matthew and Veronica under an improvised awning, arguing heatedly while pointing in different directions. "Mom is furious," Lucy commented, also watching through the window. "She spent weeks organizing this camp out." "No one can control the weather, sweetheart," I said, "though we can prepare better." "How did you know it was going to rain, Grandma?" Lucy insisted. "Even the forecast said it would be clear." I smiled as I searched my backpack for a small, portable stove. When you spend enough time in a place, you learn to read it. The clouds, the birds, even the insects all give you signals. "Sounds like magic," commented Lucy's friend, a thin girl named Martha. "It's not magic, it's experience," I replied, lighting the stove to heat water. "Your grandmother surely knows things that seem magical to you, too." "My grandma only knows how to make apple pie and criticize my clothes," Martha replied with a grimace that made everyone laugh. While preparing tea to warm up my improvised guests, I started telling them stories about Robert and our adventures in nature. I told them about that time we got lost in a forest similar to this one, and how we learned to navigate by the stars. I told them about the animals we had seen, the plants we had learned to identify, and the small survival tricks that now seemed so valuable. To my surprise, everyone was listening, fascinated, even the teenagers who would normally be glued to their phones. Perhaps the lack of signal and battery life helped, but I preferred to think it was the eternal charm of stories told next to the warmth of a steaming cup while the storm raged outside. "And this forest, Grandma?" Jake asked after a while. "Do you know this specific place well?" I felt a knot in my throat. It was the perfect time to reveal my secret, but something stopped me. It wasn't the exact right instant yet. "I know every corner of this forest," I replied sincerely. "Your grandfather and I spent a lot of time here. I could walk it with my eyes closed." "Could you show us some special places when the rain stops?" Lucy asked, with an enthusiasm I hadn't seen directed toward me in years. "It would be an honor, my dear." A knock on the tent entrance interrupted our conversation. I opened the zipper to find Matthew, soaked and looking exhausted. "Mom, are the kids okay?" "We're perfectly fine, son. Dry and warm. Do you want to come in?" Matthew glanced inside my small, already crowded tent. Not another soul could fit in there. "I just wanted to make sure they were all right. How are things outside?" I asked. "A disaster," he admitted, running a hand through his wet hair. "Several tents are completely flooded. Veronica is organizing shelters in the SUVs and in the few tents that are still in good condition." "I warned you about the location of some tents," I said, unable to contain myself. Matthew sighed. "I know, Mom. We should have listened to you." Then he looked at my grandchildren. "Kids, when it calms down a bit, go to the big SUV. We'll spend the night there." "We're fine here, Dad," Jake replied. "Grandma's telling us incredible stories." Matthew looked at me with surprise, as if he had just remembered that his mother was a person with experiences and stories of her own. "Well, if Grandma doesn't mind—" "You're welcome to stay," I assured him. "I have plenty of room in my heart, even if the tent is a little tight." My son smiled, a tired but genuine smile. "Thank you, Mom. You always know what to do in these situations." He paused and added, "Veronica wants to talk to you when the storm passes. I think she finally realized she should have listened to your advice." "I'll be available," I replied, although I doubted my daughter-in-law really wanted to admit her mistake in front of me. After Matthew left, we continued with our stories until, little by little, my young guests fell asleep. First the baby, then the teenagers, and finally Christina. Only Lucy and I remained awake, listening as the rain began to ease. "Grandma," Lucy whispered in the dark, "can I ask you something?" "Anything you want, sweetheart." "Why didn't you ever tell us all these stories before? Why did you let Mom and Dad treat you like you didn't know anything?" Her direct question hit me like a cold wave. Young people have that gift of frankness that adults lose over the years. "Sometimes, Lucy, wisdom includes knowing when to speak and when to be silent. It's not always the moment to show what you know." "But it's not fair," she insisted. "They gave you the worst spot. They ignore you. They talk about you like you're a burden." "Life is rarely fair, my child, but I'm going to tell you a secret. Sometimes, when people underestimate you, you have an advantage. You can observe, learn, and wait for the perfect moment to show who you really are." Lucy was silent, processing my words. Finally, she said, "I think I understand. It's like in my books, when the character everyone ignores turns out to be the most important one." I smiled in the darkness. "Exactly. Now get some sleep. Tomorrow is going to be an interesting day." The storm stopped just before dawn. I quietly left the tent so as not to wake my guests, and contemplated the first rays of sun filtering through the wet branches. The camp was a desolate sight. Collapsed tents, torn tarps, soaked luggage scattered in the mud. But the forest looked glorious, washed and renewed by the rain, sparkling with 1,000 drops like diamonds in the dawn light. "My Robert," I murmured to myself. "I think today is the day." I started preparing a simple breakfast with the provisions I had brought. Soon, the aroma of fresh coffee woke up my guests. "Good morning," I greeted them as they came out one by one, stretching and blinking at the bright morning. "I hope you rested well." "Better than everyone else, for sure," Jake commented, pointing toward the people emerging from vehicles and battered tents with faces that showed they had slept little and poorly. I saw Veronica in the distance, her perfect ponytail now undone and her designer clothes covered in mud stains. She was talking heatedly with Roger, pointing toward different areas of the camp. Even at this distance, I could guess she was reorganizing everything, trying to salvage her precious event. It wasn't long before she approached us, composing her best professional smile. "Good morning, family. I hope you had a tolerable night." "We slept perfectly, Mom," Lucy replied. "Grandma's tent was like an oasis in the middle of the flood." Veronica looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and something that could be interpreted as a beginning of respect. "Eleanor, Matthew told me you know this place well. I was wondering if you could help us relocate some activities, since the areas we designated are now unusable." "Of course," I replied, offering her a cup of coffee, which she accepted with a gesture of genuine gratitude. While she drank her coffee, I noticed Roger and another man I didn't recognize were measuring and marking areas near the stream. "What are they doing?" I asked. "Oh, they're just evaluating the land," Veronica replied vaguely. "For future installations." "Installations?" I insisted. Veronica hesitated for a moment, but then seemed to decide there was no reason to hide it from me. "You see, this place is perfect for our corporate retreats and family events. We're considering building some permanent cabins for next year, small ones, of course, so as not to disrupt the natural environment too much." I felt my heart pound. They were planning to build on my forest without consulting me, without having any idea that I was the owner. Worse yet, the areas they were marking were precisely the most ecologically sensitive ones, where several protected bird species nested. "And does the owner of the land agree?" I asked, keeping my voice as neutral as I could. "Of course," she replied with excessive confidence. "Matthew has been in touch with him through an intermediary. As long as we pay a reasonable rental fee, we can make improvements to the land." So my son was also involved in these plans without consulting me. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that he didn't know I was the owner. No one did. "Interesting," was all I said. "And where exactly are you planning to build?" Veronica showed me an improvised map where they had marked several areas. Indeed, almost all of them coincided with ecologically sensitive areas or areas of cultural importance to Robert and me. One of the marked spots was precisely where he had scattered some of his ashes, our special place next to the small, hidden waterfall. "I see," I murmured. "Veronica, would you mind if I organized a small walk with the kids and anyone who wants to join? I know some beautiful spots that were untouched after the storm." My daughter-in-law seemed relieved to have the young people occupied while she reorganized the camp. "That would be perfect, Eleanor. Roger can accompany them to ensure safety." "That won't be necessary," I replied firmly. "I know these trails better than anyone." Veronica hesitated, but finally nodded. "All right, but take the walkie-talkies just in case." An hour later, I had gathered a considerable group. My grandchildren, their friends, Christina with her baby, and even some curious adults who had heard about my knowledge of the forest. To my surprise, Matthew also decided to join. "I haven't explored this place in years," my son commented as we started walking. "Dad used to bring me when I was a kid, but I never got to know it as well as you do." "Your father loved this forest," I replied. "For him, it was a sanctuary." I led the group on trails almost invisible to the inexperienced eye. I showed them unique rock formations, taught them to identify medicinal plants, and told them the geological history of the place. With every step we took, I felt my connection with these young people grow, especially with my grandchildren, who now looked at me with a mixture of awe and regret for having underestimated me for so long. "How do you know so much, Grandma?" Jake asked, as we stopped next to a small crystalline stream to rest. "Life is the best teacher, my boy, and I've had a long and fortunate life." "It's not just that," Lucy intervened. "It's like this place is part of you." I smiled. My granddaughter had always been perceptive. "In a way, it is." We continued our walk until we reached an area where the forest became denser. The barely visible path wound among ancient trees until suddenly the sound of running water grew louder. "Close your eyes," I asked the group, and walk 10 more steps following my voice. They obeyed with curiosity. I guided them to the edge of a small clearing and said, "Now you can look." The gasps of astonishment were immediate. Before us opened a perfect clearing where a small but beautiful waterfall fell over moss-covered rocks, forming a crystalline pool surrounded by wildflowers. And next to the waterfall, partially hidden by the vegetation, there was a small wooden cabin. "What is this place?" Matthew asked, as surprised as the others. "I don't remember coming here with Dad." "It was our secret place," I replied, my voice slightly broken with emotion. "Robert and I discovered it during our first visit to this forest. We built the cabin with our own hands over many years." "It's beautiful," Lucy whispered, approaching the edge of the pool. "And completely unknown to the camp organizers," Jake added with a knowing smile. "I bet Mom would have given anything to know about this spot for her events." Matthew looked at me with a new understanding in his eyes. "Mom, did you and Dad come here often?" "Every anniversary for 30 years," I replied, "and whenever we needed to remember what truly mattered in life." I approached the cabin and opened the door with a small key I wore around my neck, hidden under my clothes. The interior was simple but cozy, a room with a small wood-burning stove, a table, hand-carved chairs, and shelves full of books, maps, and memories of our lives together. Everyone entered with reverence, as if they instinctively understood that they were in a sacred place to me. "Please sit down," I instructed them, pointing to the rustic chairs and benches. "There is something I want to share with you." When everyone was settled, I went to one of the shelves and took out a carved wooden box. I opened it and extracted several carefully preserved documents. "5 years ago, when Robert passed away," I began, feeling all eyes fixed on me. "He left me more than memories. He left me this forest, all of it." The silence that followed was absolute. I could see the confusion and surprise on every face, especially on Matthew's. "What do you mean, Mom?" my son finally asked. In response, I spread the documents on the table. Property deeds, topographic maps, the trust established in my name, everything legally certified and in order. Robert bought this land many years ago, when natural spaces were just beginning to be valued. He wanted to preserve this forest for future generations, for our family. I looked directly at Matthew. When he died, he asked me to keep the ownership a secret until the right moment came to share it. But then, Matthew paled, understanding the implications. "When I suggested using the land for the campout." "Yes, son. I gave you permission to use my land, making you believe it belonged to a friend of your father's, and all the plans we've been making, the structures we want to build." Matthew's voice trailed off. "Those areas you've marked for construction are precisely the most sensitive areas of the forest," I explained calmly. "Nesting grounds, biological corridors, water recharge zones. Robert and I spent years documenting every corner of this forest to ensure its conservation." Lucy approached the documents, examining them with astonishment. "So, Grandma, This whole time you've allowed us to use your property without saying anything, even when they gave you the worst spot at the camp?" I smiled. "Sometimes, sweetheart, observing teaches more than talking. I wanted to see how you treated this place, what you valued, what you ignored." "And we failed the test," Jake murmured, visibly ashamed. "It's not about passing or failing tests," I replied softly. "It's about learning and growing together. Yes, it hurt me to see how you treated the forest, how you treated me, but I also saw potential. I saw how you, my grandchildren, started to look with new eyes when I showed you another way to see things." Matthew looked devastated. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have listened to you. I should have included you in all of this." "This is not the time for regrets, son," I said, putting a hand on his. "It's time for new beginnings." "What are you going to do now?" Lucy asked. "Are you going to kick us out of the camp?" I laughed softly. "Of course not. This forest is here to be enjoyed, but enjoyed with respect, with awareness, with love." I stood up and looked at everyone present. "What I propose is to transform this camp out into something more meaningful, a space where we can reconnect not only with each other, but also with nature, where we can learn to be better stewards of what has been entrusted to us." "How do we do it?" Jake asked, visibly motivated. "By starting to repair what has been damaged," I replied. "Planting new trees where the young ones were cut, cleaning the stream, creating awareness among all the participants." "I can lead a cleanup crew," Lucy offered immediately. "And I can organize the replanting," Jake added. Matthew looked at me with a mixture of pride and shame. "Mom, you should be the one leading all of this. It's your land, your vision." I shook my head. "No, son. This forest belongs to the future. It is the young people who must lead it now, with the support of our experience." The news that I was the owner of the land spread quickly when we returned to the camp. The reactions were varied: astonishment, disbelief, shame, and in Veronica's case, evident discomfort. I found her sitting alone next to the remains of the bonfire, staring blankly at the horizon. I sat down silently next to her. "Matthew told me everything," she finally said, without looking at me. "I must look like a complete idiot in your eyes." "No, Veronica, just someone who had been looking in the wrong direction." "I gave you the worst spot at the camp," she murmured, "on your own property." "And it turned out to be the only spot that didn't flood," I replied with a smile. "Sometimes life has these ironies." She finally turned toward me. "Why didn't you say anything? Why did you let us treat you like that?" "Because some lessons cannot be taught with words," I replied. "They have to be lived." Veronica was silent for a long moment. "I don't know if I can see you the same way after this," she finally admitted. "I hope not," I replied sincerely. "I hope you can see me as I truly am, not just as your husband's mother or your children's grandmother, but as Eleanor, a woman with her own history, her own knowledge, her own resources. And with her own forest," she added, with a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "The forest has never truly been mine," I said, looking toward the trees surrounding us. "I am only its guardian for a time, as we all are for what we value." The afternoon passed with a completely different energy in the camp. Under the enthusiastic direction of my grandchildren, the participants organized themselves into teams to repair the damage from the storm, and also the damage caused by our own negligence. We picked up trash, replanted young trees, and restored the stream banks where erosion threatened. Matthew gathered everyone at sunset for a bonfire much simpler but more meaningful than the one they had originally planned. As the flames danced under the starry sky, my son did something that profoundly surprised me. He asked me to share stories about the forest, about Robert, about our life together. "My mother has been the silent guardian of this place for years," he said to everyone. "I think it's time we listen to what she has to teach us." And so, surrounded by attentive faces that now looked at me with respect and genuine curiosity, I began to tell the stories I had kept for so long. I spoke of how Robert and I discovered this forest when we were young, and how we decided to protect it when we learned it was in danger of being logged, of how every tree planted had a story, a purpose, a meaning. "This forest taught us patience," I told them. "It showed us that the most valuable things grow slowly, that they require constant attention, that they demand respect." I looked at my grandchildren, who were sitting right in front of me, their faces illuminated by the flames, their eyes bright with admiration. Like the love for family, like the respect that is earned over time, like the wisdom that only comes when you learn to listen not only to others, but also to nature, to the silence, to your own heart. When I finished speaking, there was a long and meaningful silence, finally broken by Jake, who stood up solemnly. "I propose something," my grandson said, with a voice that was no longer that of an insecure teenager, but that of a young man discovering his purpose. "I propose that we turn this annual campout into more than a social gathering. Let's transform it into a time for learning, for connecting, for preservation. And I propose," Lucy added, standing next to her brother, "that Grandma Eleanor be formally recognized as the guardian of the forest, and that her knowledge and vision guide our future activities." To my surprise, everyone stood up, even Veronica, and applauded enthusiastically. I felt tears running down my cheeks as Jake placed a woven blanket with designs representing trees and rivers over my shoulders. A symbolic but profoundly moving gesture. "Thank you," I simply said, because words were not enough to express what I felt. That night, while everyone slept, I quietly left my tent and walked to our special spot by the waterfall. The full moon illuminated the clearing with a silver light, making the water sparkle as if it were alive. "We did it, Robert," I whispered to the night. "We found the right moment. The forest is in good hands now." A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the trees as if responding to me. I felt a deep peace, the certainty that, despite having been given the worst spot at the camp, I had found my true place in the heart of my family. Upon returning, I saw that someone had moved my things. My tent was no longer next to the bathrooms, but in the center of the main clearing, in the best possible spot. And next to it, I found a note written in Jake's uneven handwriting. "For the true owner of the forest and of our hearts, thank you for teaching us to see beyond the obvious." I lay down in my new location, listening to the night sounds of the forest I loved so much. I didn't need a huge tent, or the most comfortable spot, or constant recognition. What truly mattered was that they finally saw me as I was, not as they had assumed I was. And that, after all, was the best place I could occupy. That of a person respected for who she really is, not for what she owns, or for what others expect of her. The forest would be here long after I was gone, but now I had the certainty that its spirit, our spirit, would live on in the new generations. And that was the true legacy that Robert and I had wanted to leave. Not a piece of land, but a way of seeing the world. Not a property, but a purpose. Not a campout, but a community united by respect and love for nature and for each other. And it all started because they gave me the worst spot at the camp without knowing that I owned the land, so I decided to show them a better way.